Hello and welcome back to the Wasteland, everybody. Welcome back to Fallout New Vegas, where today we're going to be taking a look at the 25mm APW, one of the very few weapons that's exclusive to the Gunrunner's Arsenal DLC. That's not necessarily like a unique version of a different weapon. This is an entirely new weapon that was added with that DLC, and this is probably one of the best explosive weapons for a general purpose build. Like, if you're going with an explosive weapon, this one might be like your go-to weapon for most situations. So the 25mm APW, since it is a Gunrunner's Arsenal only weapon, you can only buy it from vendors. Sometimes merchants can be selling this. The Gunrunners tend to sell it. I think they'll sell it at any level. I think some other vendors can sell it too. And most traveling merchants can also carry the upgrade parts for this, which is pretty awesome. So the APW requires 75 explosives and 5 strength to wield. Not the most amount of strength, but decently high explosives in order to wield effectively. You don't have to wield explosives super effectively though, you're trying to hit close enough to things. This one, it does have a smaller explosion radius than some other explosive weapons. Like, I think it's a little bit smaller than something like the grenade rifle, which is kind of something to keep in mind. This does a whopping 2 damage on hit, but it does 50 damage on explosion. So that's fine. 52 damage isn't very high for an explosive weapon, but this weapon can fire very, very fast. You can do really fast follow-up shots, and you can do continual fire with it really well. This deals 130 damage per second, which is pretty decent for a weapon like this, as well as damage per second is a little bit weird because that's assuming you're only hitting one target, and explosive weapons tend to hit a lot of targets, so that's pretty good. This has a big old 0 for crit damage, like most explosive weapons do. It has a 1x crit chance, which doesn't matter if you can't hit crits. This only costs 25 action points, which is pretty good. That's not very much for an explosive weapon like this, and this is a decent weapon to be using in VATS. It's probably one of the few explosive weapons I would recommend for actually using in like a VATS build. Most other explosive weapons I wouldn't, because it's really easy to blow your stuff up with. The APW is a little bit harder to blow yourself up with than other explosives. You can still definitely do it, but it is a little bit more difficult to do than something like a missile launcher or a Fat Man or whatever it might be. This has 0.7 spread, which isn't very high for an explosive weapon. It would be high for like a rifle or a pistol, but you're shooting explosives, so you don't need to be that accurate, just close enough. This one holds 6 rounds in it regularly. However, that can be increased to 8 if you have the extended mag on it, so that's pretty nice. 6 rounds is still pretty good, and this does have a very fast reload, so getting back into combat is very easy. This weighs 8, so it's not too heavy, and this has 150 item health, which you would think might be kind of an issue with how quickly this one can shoot, but not so much. I really don't have a problem with these things breaking all that fast. Usually I have plenty of time to fix them up because they do so well against crowds, and that's the main way that I'm going to be using this weapon. It's also one of the few explosive weapons that I actually recommend to use indoors because it's not that bad indoors. For the pros of the APW, this one does high damage per second. Its damage is okay, but its DPS is where it really shines. It has good ammo. The 25mm is very common for most vendors to sell, and it doesn't really have any competition besides the machine grenade launcher. And that's the only other weapon that uses the 25mm, so you're either going to be using this or the other. And then this one is a great general purpose weapon for an explosives build. It's probably one of the best ones to just pull out and shoot at just about anything at almost any distance, I guess within reason, so long as you don't have to really lob the shots or anything. The only real con to this weapon is that the item health can go down kind of fast if you keep spamming it, but even that isn't that big of a deal. It's not terrible in terms of item health by any means. There is also different ammos that you can load into this. So you have the standard 25mm grenade. These ones just do regular damage, have a regular explosion radius, nothing real crazy about them. That's probably going to be your go-to ammo. It tends to be what I use, mostly because vendors sell a lot of it. There is the pulse rounds. Pulse rounds dramatically nerf your damage because it only does 8% of your total damage, so it does very low, much lower than like pulse slugs do with the shotguns, but it does do extra damage towards robots and power armor. It also nerfs your AoE, so your AoE is smaller than it otherwise would be, but that's okay because you're generally just going to be firing this directly at something, and the APW is at least decent at firing directly at stuff, and you can do some extra damage to robots, so that's not bad if you want to take this to like Old World Blues. There is timed rounds, which these ones are a little bit weird because they have a 5-second fuse, but the 5 seconds is not on the grenade actually hitting the ground. It's as soon as the grenade is launched. So you fire this out, and then within 5 seconds, this will explode. So you can kind of airburst stuff with this. It's really awkward, and I don't really use the timed explosives all that much, but they're not terrible. They're just different. They don't change your stats at all. It's just the 5-second fuse is different. They also have plasma grenades. Plasma grenades do 30% more damage than standard grenades, but they have a slightly smaller explosion radius, so you just have to be a little bit more accurate with these, and these have the same particle effects as like the plasma grenades that you would normally throw or the plasma mines. And then you also have the high explosive grenades, which these ones deal 35% more damage and have a bigger explosion radius. So you can hit yourself easier, but you can hit more enemies easy too. The high explosives can be pretty nice, but vendors don't tend to sell a whole lot of them. Usually I just stock up on a bunch of 25mm grenades, and the APW actually works really, really well for me. Let's talk about some perks too that affect the APW. You have 3 major ones and then some other minor ones that could also help with this. Demo Expert gives you more damage and it's just fantastic on any explosive. So if you're running an explosives build, take that one. Take it all 3 times because that's 60% more damage. So that's really good. Splash damage. Splash damage can be good on this weapon, although you might not want to take it because, like I said, this is probably one of the best indoor fighting explosive weapons, which is kind of a rarity with explosive weapons. Explosive weapons usually don't do very well indoors. The APW actually does fairly well, and it's kind of because it has a small explosion radius, so it's not very difficult to put it on an enemy and not hit yourself. So you might not want to take splash damage. That one's kind of a double-edged sword. And then hit the deck can also be useful with any explosive build because it gives you explosion resistance. So if you are hitting yourself, you're not doing as much damage. That can actually help quite a bit. You'll still probably be crippling limbs fairly quick because the APW does that really well. But you likely won't be taking very much damage because the APW has such low base damage that you can largely ignore it thanks to hit the deck, so that's pretty good. That won't always be the case, like if you scale this up with damage perks like Demo Expert and maybe something like Bloody Mess, you'll still be hurting yourself, but you're not going to be hurting yourself as much as you otherwise would be. With all this considered, I would put the 25mm APW up into the A tier on our tier list. It is a very solid all-around weapon that does really, really well at its job. But that's not all, because there is still the modded version that we need to talk about, which you can put 3 mods in this, and it is very, very easy to find all the mods for this, because since they are Gunrunner's Arsenal mods, most vendors tend to sell them, and sometimes you can buy all 3 from the same vendor. I've bought all 3 from like the Gunrunners before. You can buy them from Crimson Caravan, you can go to the 188, you can just talk to traveling merchants. There's a chance that a whole lot of people will have the different upgrades for this, and its upgrades are pretty good. So the 3 upgrades that it gets, one is the expanded drum, which we sort of talked about when we were going over the base stats. This increases its magazine size from 6 to 8, which might not seem like a whole lot, but going up from 6 to 8 with an explosive weapon is pretty massive. Most explosive weapons don't hold very many shots, and actually holding more for a general purpose weapon like this is really good. You can get a long barrel. The long barrel is really, really nice on this because it doubles the amount of velocity that you would otherwise have from this, and you can also pair this with something like Heave Ho. Heave Ho is another perk that would actually affect weapons like this because it affects all explosive weapons too, interestingly enough, so you could throw things even further. And if you have the long barrel on this, at most the ranges that you're usually going to be fighting with explosives, which is usually not super far, it's kind of like medium ranges where you want to fight, this is really, really nice because you can just aim it like a regular gun and just fire it directly at something, and you'll likely be hitting grenades in their general area, and then you can just adjust a little bit based on where you see the shots going to. So long barrel is definitely worth getting. And then you can also get upgraded internals. Upgraded internals give you 25% increased rate of fire, so you can spam this even faster and have even more damage per second. And this weapon really, really likes to be spammed, and it makes for a great general purpose weapon for an explosives build. Usually if I'm running an explosives build, I'll have like this, and I'll have Thump Thump, and those will be like my go-to weapons. And then I'll have some sort of big weapon, either like the Fat Man or the missile launcher or something. But this weapon is generally one of the ones that I go for, and it's a really, really handy weapon. So I'm actually going to put the modded APW up into the S tier. It's really, really good, and that's kind of surprising because on paper, it honestly doesn't look very good. It looks like it would be one of the weaker explosive weapons and kind of just a throwaway weapon, because why would you go with this when you could go with like a missile launcher that hits substantially harder? It has arguably better ammos, and it's extremely accurate, so you can use it at long range. The missile launcher is really good as like an explosive sniper rifle, sort of. Assuming you're not using like the 50 cal explosive rounds, which don't actually work with an explosives build. It'll still work, it's just they don't get buff from it. And then you see like the APW, which has really kind of lowish stats, at least in terms of damage. But that doesn't really matter with an explosives build, because an explosives build also has very high chances of crippling limbs. And if everything's slowed down and it can't catch up to you, and you can just keep walking backward and spamming stuff at it, that's kind of all you need to do, and that works really well. As well as, since you can spam this so fast, explosives have a really high chance of knocking enemies down or knocking enemies away, breaking limbs and knocking weapons away. So even against like ranged enemies, this weapon works really well, because a lot of the time they just can't shoot back because you just bully them more or less with all the explosives you're firing. So would I recommend the APW? Absolutely. If you're going with an explosives build, by all means use it. If you've never used it before, I'd also recommend it. I know a lot of people haven't because they've just kind of seen the stats and thought that it wasn't that great. It is actually really, really good, so try it out. So thank you guys so very much for watching this video. Tell me your thoughts on the APW down in the comments below. I'd love to hear them. What do you guys think about it? Do you use it? And if so, do you use it in an explosive build or just kind of a general purpose build? Thanks for watching this. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye, everybody.